Good evening, everyone. So, having spent almost a year undercover inside the new far-right movement, the alt-right, interacting with leaders of its most notorious networks, and witnessing the murder of Heather Heyer at the Charlottesville rally, our guest tonight is an astonishingly brave individual, to say the least. A researcher for anti-fascism campaign group Hope Not Hate, please join me in welcoming our guest for this evening, Patrick Hermansson. Thanks so much for coming this evening.
Thank you.
Whatever you prefer. If you just take it away with telling us about what organization you've come from and your experience going undercover.
Yes, thanks for having me, first of all. I'm from an organization called Hope Not Hate. It's an anti-racist and anti-fascist organization founded in 2004. At the time, our funders saw the rise of BNP and kind of the failure of anti-racism and anti-fascism at the time. There were a lot of protests, lots of activism, but what it usually turned into was demonstrations in city centers, London and Manchester, which is quite far from where it actually matters, and the people who were actually influenced by this and who they actually wanted to change the mind of. And these protests often led to kind of unforeseen consequences, like these activists were there and they were very engaged, but at the end of the day, the white middle-class kids went home and felt that they had done something, while people of color often ended up, arrested and kettled by the police and hurt because they were often the targets, also by the counter-protesters, of course. So they started thinking of another way to do things, and that's when Hope Not Hate was born. So it's an organization that we have people spread out across the whole country. These are people in local communities that organize different types of events. They knock on doors, they talk to people, they put pressure on local politicians to make people feel like they can change things. And with that, we combine that with research. We believe that good anti-fascism, anti-racism needs to be founded in an understanding of what you're fighting. And that's where I come in, and the research team, which is quite small. Most of it is the campaign side. But we look at far-right groups, how they're organizing, where they're organizing, and their very immediate plans, and help the campaigners to make decisions on what they're going to do. And we had quite a few wins over the years. And we have brought down organizations, and maybe we can't take credit for the fall of BNP, but we did something. And part of research is that like I said, we really need to understand these groups. And some things you just can't understand from the outside. We can read their manuscripts and blogs and magazines, but there are some things you can't figure out because they have one face outwards often and another one inwards. And to know what they really look like on the inside, what they're actually planning, what they actually think, that often you have to be on the inside to know. And that's why I was inside a couple of far-right groups for a year between fall 2016 and the fall of last year. So I was a member first of all, I was a member in a fascist group in London called the London Forum, which is quite a traditional group. and they want to intellectualize far-right ideas. And they bring together speakers and organizations under one single roof and organize these conferences. And we saw that as a danger because when the far right is united, that's when they're the most dangerous. So that's why I went on the inside. And I will go over this briefly so we have some kind of basis to ask questions on. But from there, I traveled between several different groups. Although that we often talk about the far right as growing very quickly, far right ideas are growing in society overall, and that might be true, but these really extreme groups are still quite small. It's a small world. People in them are often members in many different groups, and they travel a lot and have connections with each other, and money travels back and forth, and we want to know how that networks looks like. So over the year, I traveled between many different groups, or I was referred from one person to the next, and over the year I ended up in different cities in the UK, and then later in the US. It went very quickly, mainly because I'm white and I'm from Sweden originally, and the far right has this fetishism for Scandinavia, which is built on old racial ideas about racial purity coming, the origin of the white race being Scandinavia for some reason. So I played on that. I became a Swedish teacher for an organizer that wanted to know Swedish just because he thought that was, he wanted to be closer to his roots somehow. And from there, I went to the US and met and spent a lot of time with alt-right groups. The alt-right is mainly a US phenomenon, but it's here as well. And over time, I ended up vetting people for these organizations, which means doing background checks. I spoke at some conferences, and I ended up in Charlottesville with the big clashes there this summer. And yeah, that's a short summary, I think.
Wow. So one thing I'd like to point out is Patrick, I really think, plays down the kind of extent of what he did, and to go undercover for a full year pretending to be someone else. I mean, I guess on a personal level, how did you feel going undercover in such a way, under such danger? Like, what drove you specifically, like your willingness to put yourself in that kind of danger?
Well, first of all, the danger is not huge. There were moments later, maybe, that got quite dangerous. I spent time with armed white supremacists in the US, and they are quite crazy. But up until then, these groups are mostly quite old. They're not really out on the streets, many of these like top layer people, whereas where I kind of went in consciously. And I am white. It's not me they want to target. But then why I went inside, like I said, I'm a curious person, and I'm an anti-fascist. And I really believe that we need to understand these people in order to fight them. And I have worked for a kind of similar organization to Hope Not Hate in Sweden before I came here. And I've seen the rise of a nationalist, previously Nazi organization and a party in Sweden, which is the Sweden Democrats, grow to the extent that they are now the third largest party. And that has affected friends of mine, and that's like simplified motivation for anti-fascism. I think far-right ideas is one of the biggest threats we have to this society I would like to live in, and I was a good candidate. It's you need to you need to look like me if you're supposed to do this. Yeah, I'm white and blue-eyed. If you're not, it's very difficult, you know. So it was one thing that I could do where I could contribute something.
Yeah.
Simple as that. And then I didn't really know what extent the whole thing would get. I didn't know I would end up in the US and that sort of thing.
Right. Wow. So you kind of touched upon this, you know, the dangers of the far right, and also in your report you describe how social events were as common as activism in the alt-right movement and in these circles. So from your experience, would you say that the alt-right is more than just a political movement? And if yes, does that make it more dangerous?
I guess it depends what you call political. But they see it that way. They talk about meta-politics a lot. Maybe you've heard the word. It's about, you know, what comes before politics, or what is politics is built on. It's culture, in a way. They often talk that we are in a cultural war. So it's not political in the sense that, no, they don't want to create parties. They don't look to elect an alt-right president. You know, there are these old Nazis that, you know, believe in some sort of revolution. But these younger, more alt-right people, they've lost faith in the democratic system overall. They don't believe that even if they would get a politician or a party in power, that is just a temporary thing. They will get voted out the next election. What they need to do is to change the values of the general public to like a very fundamental level. So we could get like somebody that, you know, we agree with in power, they think. But at the end of the day, like, if we really want to change society, we have to change how people think about the questions that matter to them. So this is when they talk about the Overton window, which is basically like the idea of what is acceptable debates in society, like kind of the limits of acceptable debate. And, you know, you could say simplified that sexism is looked down on, you know, very simplified. They want to make then sexism natural, that men and women have certain roles, and that should be, normal, the norm. That should be assumed to begin with, and discussion shouldn't be, you know, about that at all. That should just be an assumption. So that means that then their idea would be in the kind of the center of the Overton window. Then, so that's what they want to do, and they do that through media and you know, social media, online publications, all these fake news type of things that everybody wants to talk about. And for me, I think that's more dangerous. To come back to the end of everything, it's because if it succeeds, it's much more difficult to reverse.
Yeah.
And it's much more creeping, and it takes a long time, but it goes quicker than you think. And we know that, you know, progressive ideas talk about gay rights, for example. That's something that's changed quite dramatically in the last 15 years. At least in Sweden, where I'm from, and I think here as well. And there's a lot less to do, but it's changed very quickly. Why can't it change the other way? That's what they believe. Yeah. And you know, it's hard to argue against it. We can have this idea that history moves in one single direction. I don't know. Is there proof for that? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And they are good at getting their message out. And they have a lot of followers on their side, and we can see generally that like discourse online, on Twitter, on Facebook, is quite harsh. We live in a quite polarized society now, more than we did a couple of years ago. So yeah, I think it's quite dangerous. Yeah.
Just thinking about this question of like being forced to re-question the trajectory of values. You know, so often it's been previously, at least before Brexit and Trump's election, we've kind of been under this, what seems to now be an illusion, that we were on an upward trajectory towards progressive values, etc. And looking at the alt-right movement specifically, so they coined their name in 2008, which is of course Obama's presidency. So kind of to what extent do you think this is a backlash to kind of, at least in in the movement becoming official, a backlash to Obama's presidency, which has kind of now culminated in what some people deem the white lash, that is Trump's election?
I think it's certainly part of it. I'm a bit cautious though. I think that it's a very common answer that people get. You know, feminism, the right, like progressive values create a backlash, and we kind of put the blame on feminists and progressive people, and they're racist, like they're too extreme, so we get a backlash. That's because you're too extreme. I don't really buy it. I'm sure it's part of it. I know myself, like people I've talked to, they argue often that they feel oppressed, that, you know, they often talk about kind of their red pill moment, which is kind of when they realized or like kind of joined the alt-right, so to say, or realized that the left is oppressive, you could say. You often talk about that as them saying something, somebody calling them out for being racist, sexist, homophobic. And then you have the question there, or like the choice there, to either change your mind or go along with that idea. Because if everybody calls you racist all the time, you know, after a time, and then you're a 16-year-old guy and you don't know what to do, and then you can just go along with it. And you can get very angry at them. So sure, that's one part. Like that, I'm sure those things help people join the movement, especially kind of these anti-feminist ideas are very crucial to why people join. People often say, and we see that online, for example, that people move from these anti-feminist forums to more conspiratorial far-right forums. So you start being a misogynist and you end up being, you know, an anti-Semite. It actually happens. It's really strange, but it happens because in these forums you have people a bit further to the right. And it's like this continuous cycle where people push you a little bit further. So yes, the feminists are pressing you. And feminism is connected to left-wing ideas. And left-wing's ideas are pushed by the Jews. So it's many steps, but quite often people start there. But at the same time, I think to a degree that's always been there, and in a way it might be inevitable. Like if you are very privileged, equality can feel like oppression. If you give other people rights and you take away your kind of dominance, that could feel like oppression, maybe. But we need to be careful not to blame progressive ideas for this. But of course, there are times where you know, the discussion is a bit simplified. We call people out, you know, we call white men out for being privileged, and they should, you know, just accept that. But if you know, don't have a job, or you failed university and you live with your mom, maybe you don't really feel that privilege. So sure, that might be one thing, but we can't forget kind of the history of far-right ideas either. That these ideas have been there for a long time. They came long before Obama, and they stayed.
Yeah, I just wanted to readdress that idea, you know, the alt-right has a lot of its name in the US, but as you say, its ideological roots seem to also be from Europe and kind of insurgency of neo-Nazism. And can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. So the alt-right is, some people are critical of using the name alt-right. We should just call them white supremacists or something. We use the term alt-right because we think that they are actually different. But they're mostly different in how they're organizing and how they're getting their ideas across. When their underlying ideology often comes from old fascist, neo-Nazi, misogynist kind of ideas and thinkers, and those are often European. Some of them are old Italians that influenced, fascism's rise in Italy. And then there's a movement called the European New Right, which comes from France, which is very critical to progressive ideas. It's from the 60s, so it's a bit of a reaction there again. Maybe you are right in that it is a reaction, because that was very much a reaction to the 68 movement and everything there, which really puts the focus on the left, traditional values, which then is men and women being different, that men and women are fundamentally different, and therefore we should organize society in that way. So that has a lot of impact on the alt-right today. They're also influenced by the identitarians, which is a French mainly organization and movement.
Yeah. Going back to kind of their tangible impact in politics today, especially in the US, looking back at Trump's campaign, looking at his presidency today, when he excuses the Charlottesville rally as assigning blame on both sides. How much do you think he relies on the support of people from the alt-right or from those circles, and kind of far-right movements and extremism?
I think Trump is very conscious that he has support from these people, but that doesn't mean that they have a direct impact, and I think that distinction is quite important to make. Like any politician, you look into who supports you and who doesn't, and try to keep your base, and these people are his base to a degree, but they're not many enough to be his main concern. That just doesn't make any sense, I think. Their impact is difficult to measure overall. We have a hard time doing that. We can see that they try to affect change. They get involved in every European election in some way by backing some leader. In France, Marine Le Pen, or in Austria, the FPÖ. They choose somebody and back them online and make quite big campaigns about it. But does that have an impact? I haven't seen any direct evidence of that. It's a bit simplified to say that the alt-right got Trump elected. There's just not the numbers there for it, although it was a very close election. What we do see is that these ideas that they have impact on mainstream politicians. We see right-wing, usually, parties across Europe where politicians are starting to use their type of symbols. They're very good at coming up with different forms of symbols, memes, and that sort of thing. So those are quite easy to track. And we can see how politicians across Europe are starting to use those sometimes. And we can also see how sometimes alternative medias are being quoted. So it was just earlier this week in the European Parliament, a parliamentarian quoted Lawrence Southern, who's she to the lighter side, alt-light we call her, of this movement. They quoted her on murder of white people in South Africa, where she has made a documentary where she claims that it's the Afrikaans population of South Africa that is being attacked in some sort of racial war going on there. So and these are crazy ideas, obviously, but we see that they are actually being quoted. This was the European Parliament. So of course it has some impact.
Yeah. So I'd like to open up the floor for questions. If anybody has any questions. Yeah, can we start with the man there?
About groups such as Antifa in America, which share your aims but have methods which are much more similar to the far-right groups. What do you think about them?
Yeah, this is of course a difficult question. I mean, Hope and Hate is a completely non-violent organization. And like I said before, we don't engage in demonstrations or protests of any kind, because we don't believe they work mostly, or that they can have too much negative side effects. And then when it comes to Antifa, they do use these tactics that we don't agree with. So of course we are critical of that. At the same time, I don't think we can compare it to the other side, because there's a difference in anger towards ideologies that are fundamentally genocidal. That anger is understandable. Then we can discuss the tactics. And the violence perpetrated in the name of those ideologies, or to advance those ideologies. So yeah, I think that's the big difference. But yeah, I don't think, like Charlottesville, for example, it would have been a better idea to not do anything there, because now it's a world news event. And it shouldn't have been, I think. But at the same time, we need to show resistance to these things. So it's a difficult, I don't know.
Just behind there.
Hi, I'd be really interested to know how you went about the personal relationships that you had to presumably form during your year undercover. Like, how did you feel about any kind of friendships or whatever that you inevitably had to at least feign?
It's a really good question. That takes a long answer, but it's something that I spend a lot of time thinking about. Yeah, and it is an issue that you really need to think about, and that we at Hope and Hate think about a lot, because we are against these ideologies and the effects of them. We are not out to, we're not out after individuals. We don't want to hurt people, So, but you end up in this strange situation where I'm there and lying to people and building relationships with people, and that is needed. You don't get anywhere without that. So it involves like a level of friendship. And you, in that sense, you use people. That's how you get further. But what we're very conscious about is how we expose them. So I have to deal with that. That's how that's my personal thing that I have to deal with, lying to people. And some of them might have quite difficult lives, to be honest, and have real issues that I can understand and that I might also have. Because you sit and talk with somebody that, and they have issues with their family and their rent and their partners. These are things that, almost anybody can understand, and you have to see that, but yet you have to always see what you're doing in a larger perspective, that you have these issues as a person, and so does so many people. But that doesn't excuse what you're doing. It just doesn't. But then, what I brought up before, I hope we're very conscious of how we deal with them afterwards. Like, we never expose people that we don't need to expose. We only ever expose the very, very top level, those that radicalize people, bring in new people, grow the movement, of course, violent people.
Yeah.
But the rest, we want them to leave. So,
Just consequently, from the report, were you ever worried that exposing people didn't actually reduce the effects of the alt-right, but gave them a platform for people to understand what they were and maybe legitimize them? So I suppose, did you see, as a result of your report, a reduction in their action?
If I saw a reduction in their action afterwards? The support, it's difficult to measure the support to begin with. What we do know, and yes, to begin with, yes, this is something we think about. But what we do know is that these organizations that I was in was more or less, the main organization on the forum is not functioning anymore. It doesn't function because they were built on the idea of secrecy, and we threw that out the window. Some of the other ones have had times where they haven't done anything for several months. Some of them are still in that period. And we created some conflict. So we know that we stopped certain things to happen. Absolutely, we know that. That's measurable. Support overall, difficult to say. We made the public more aware of them. We put them in a bad light, which makes people, I hope, conscious about what they're joining, because lots of people, like I said before, when it's misogynist things, especially misogyny, that's something you can kind of join this forum, and then over time you end up in these more extreme ones. But what we need to do is to increase kind of the barrier, so that people get in touch with these people, these symbols, these websites, that people feel like this is not okay. And I think by bringing it up the way we did is a way to do that. Is it 100% effective? No. Could it be done better? Maybe, but not that I know of. So overall, I'm pretty sure we have a positive outcome, but of course they also gain some attention, and that might have made someone be more interested in them. Overall, I'm very sure it's positive, yeah.
Just over here.
How does it feel to be around people who are directing abuse against people of color, people like me? And did you have to get involved in that kind of abuse to be accepted?
Surprisingly, no. You get very far by asking questions and agreeing. You have to agree with it. You can't question it unless it's to a very detailed level. But you don't actually have to express hate to be inside, especially, this is the difference between different groups, right? In these more, intellectual groups that are not out on the street, they discuss things, everybody wants to talk because they're people. And if you listen to that and nod, you get very far. And then there's also, the second thing is their kind of anger with the left. which is not racist. It functions in a bit of a different way. So I directed most of my anger, or what I expressed as anger, towards the lack of freedom of speech in society, the left in general. So that's a way out for me. But of course, those things are also problematic. Yeah, sure. So you have to, you are in a far right group. So at the end of the day, yeah, you have to express something and you have to agree with it. Yeah, so that's, yeah. But at the same time, yeah, and how it is to be around it, it's difficult sometimes. I've been to meetings where, they openly discuss concentration camps. I've been to meetings where they applaud the Orlando shooting, where mass shooting in a gay club in Florida, and I'm a gay person. Like, at those points, you are very angry, and you want to leave and you want to argue. But that's when you have to think of the longer perspective again.
Yeah.
Is there one moment or one comment that you remember finding the most difficult to stomach, the most sort of impossible to sit through at the time?
It's a good question, and the reason is because when you ask that, I can't think of anything, and that's what's scary, because over time, and this is like one of my personal revelations, is that you can get used to anything. These like extreme ideas, like they talk about repatriation, like I said before, they talk about positively about a mass shooting of almost 50 people. All these things, after a time, it just flies over your head. You get used to it, and you don't even remember it. But some of the worst things, yeah, that sort of thing in Charlottesville, it's extreme stuff. They talk about bathing in the blood of all sorts of minority groups that they just name one after the other. It's horrible things.
Just on that note, so having interacted with these people on such a level and kind of seen them comfortably at their worst, do you think it's possible to have dialogue with them?
Depends who they are. They are different people. Like, people in the far right and the alt-right are, it's quite a lot of different types of people, and they're there for different reasons, or they entered for different reasons, and some, maybe, many very difficult. Like, these ideas are not rational. They don't come from a rational place. They come from emotions a lot. Like, you can see that when you talk to somebody, and you can, they change kind of their whole picture of the world from the beginning of a sentence to the end of the sentence. And you can ask a single question about some theory that they have, and it changed the whole theory. And that theory is the reason why they joined the movement. Like, I talked to a woman once about, she talked about the conspiracy that, or her theory or belief that Jewish people were selling people's birth certificates on the stock market. And I stood there and I listened, and I was, okay, but how do you sell anything else than stocks on the stock market? So that was a valid question. And she just can't answer. And you start talking about, oh, is it, you just forget that, and you start talking, oh, like, why do they do this? And you can't answer, and you start saying, oh, is it because of the tax, income, people, citizens equals tax? You just make something up right then and there. And she buys it. And she tells that to the next person. So like in just like by 2-3 questions, you've changed somebody's conspiracy, and that's like how they kind of introduced yourself to you, and they say how many meetings about this they've been to. It's really strange, but it's quite common. It comes from really strange places. So debating it, like, sure, I could change her idea a little bit, but I would never have any possibility of her changing her complete mind, saying that they don't sell anything on the stock market, the birth certificates are safe. That wouldn't be possible, because you question it, and she modifies the theory, but it's still there. And it's all these ideas come from a conspiratorial place. Racist doesn't exist. White people are not, it's a very fuzzy, it's a spectrum. Who is a white person, who is not? Yeah, I mean, like, there's a spectrum there. There's a gray zone. People have, so all these ideas, it's just things that they've decided, and it comes from a lot of different things, but it rarely comes from rational thought, and therefore debate is very difficult. That's why we work more with, we work a lot with people that tend to vote for these parties and that sort of thing. Those, absolutely. People that vote for BNP and UKIP and different types there. But people that vote for far-right parties, can you discuss with them? Absolutely, yeah. Can. That's what we do a lot.
So,
but these people, the activists, very difficult.
So by saying that, these people who vote for them, you can speak to them, because essentially, therefore, there is some rationality to them. What do you think is driving the support of these far-right movements by, like, rational people?
I mean, I don't know if anybody's rational, but it's not necessarily that they are rational, but they base it on other things than, deep-seated fear for, their race and that sort of thing. You vote for, take BNP, for example, any far-right party in Europe, you vote for it. There are many reasons, and some of them are definitely racist, but then there are also those things that are, ideas about work and safety and simple economic questions, or lack of interest from other parties in your community. I mean, there are lots of examples where, our activists and people have knocked on doors and said, what are you going to vote for? And they say, BNP. And we ask, why? And they say, because none of the other parties have been here. But they knocked on our door. And they asked what we thought. And Labour and the Conservatives didn't. So there are many reasons there.
Yeah.
There are not so much about the ideology per se.
Yeah.
I think.
So, having gone undercover and written this report, Hope Not Hate writing this report on the alt-right and the international alt-right, where do they hope to go from here? How does Hope Not Hate hope to move forwards from this?
I mean, we keep doing what we are doing, and of course the alt-right is something we look at very closely right now, because they are growing still. They have had issues in the last months, but we look a lot at the US, we look a lot more internationally than we did before, but definitely much more international outlook overall, because far-right groups nowadays are connected, and they get a lot of their inspiration from abroad. Leaders travel a lot, and then there are all these medias that are online. Since it's so online-based now, everything gets more international, inevitably, and therefore we need to look internationally. Like, we have British people, we have Paul Joseph Watson, for example, who's like one of the people that spread some of the conspiracies about Hillary Clinton, that she was unhealthy. He's British, but something like 70% of his audience is in the US. And there's the other way around as well.
So do you think they'll ever be subsiding, or are they just growing and trending increasingly?
I mean, right now I think it's better than it was half a year ago, but it's the alt-right is getting stronger and stronger, and they're changing their tactics and are getting better at their activism. So right now it's not, and I mean, this is a general trend with far-right ideas and movements right now. But, you know, things change quickly and could be different in a couple of years.
I'd just like to open it again for any last opportunities for questions from the floor. No. So maybe just a little bit more on Hope Not Hate, kind of what made you do it through them. You, of course, mentioned it in your introduction, but also kind of how can students or other people get involved, and what is Hope Not Hate doing at the moment?
So to begin with, why Hope Not Hate? I think Hope Not Hate is a great organization for the reasons I said before. They do things a little bit differently, and it can sound weird sometimes not to protest for things, but we have had a lot of successes, and I believe in the work they do, which is very close to people, and I think that matters. And then there's just not that many organizations that do these types of things in the UK or in Europe overall. There are just very few that does it, and of those, Hope Not Hate does it really well. And then what people can do, there's a lot you can do, I think. You should sign up for our email to begin with, which is a lot of interesting insights. But then we also organize a lot of events and actions across the country for different causes, and we always want more people. There will be elections. We always need activists to knock on doors, for example. And then we need people at universities as well. Like, I'm happy to take email addresses as that. And then anti-fascism in life overall. How do you do that? Like, you should not let these, you should not let things go. You should not accept things being said without challenging it. I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah, and I'd just like to back that point. I worked at Hope Not Hate during the summer, and I would definitely suggest getting in touch and potentially working there during the summer, interning or anything. But I think on that note, thank you so much, Patrick.
Thank you.
And yeah, if you join me in thanking Patrick for speaking.
Thanks.